So today, we get to explore a newer way, a healthier way, a more creative and interesting way. I've written some things down that, if you'll forgive me, I'll look at. Boundaries, according to Satyaseva and me, I call it the balaklohe. And I'm going to put in the chat how to spell that. The balaklohe is Gaelic, and it means stone wall. Bala is stone, cloche is wall. And one of the reasons why I was very inspired by this image is my ancestry is Irish. And when you go to Ireland, you see all of these balaclohes all over the landscape of Ireland. They're married to the landscape, these rolling hills everywhere. Some of them have been tended for thousands of years, even, if you can imagine. They are generational. And I was very moved to have this image pop into my head because a boundary is a way of framing your life, of framing my life. So I'm going to try to speak about this in the first person. And the four themes, the four things that we're going to be looking at this month. The first is the stones of emotion and action. That's what we're going to talk about today. The second is the altar of understanding that is created by you making an effort to build a boundary. You actually build an altar of understanding. The third and the fourth have to do with our own actions within the framed space, within the boundaried space we create. The first is to pause and to tend to your own boundaries. The walls that you are building, the walls that you are framing your life, my personhood. And then the fourth week this month that we're going to talk about are two of the things that we do because we're messy human beings. Two things that we do, how we engage the wall that are not particularly skillful, and they're really, really fascinating, I think. The first is all the ways we jump the wall and we get into somebody else's space and we get into somebody else's business because we know what to do for them and we know how to clean up their space and their mess and their life. And so before we know it, we're in their space like Scooby-Doo characters meddling. So the trick is get the heck out of that space, come back to your own space and stay boundaried. The second thing that we do is we get on top of the altar of understanding and we patrol it. I am the biggest busybody, nosy Nelly you have ever met in your life. I'm forever on people's boundaries, looking in, hey, sniffing around. What are you doing in there? I'm just up there looking. Might drop a little seed of unsolicited advice. Oh, I'm all over it, waving my freak flag for everyone to see. Good golly. Patrolling and policing the walls. Jumping the walls. All right. Here's a thought I want to plant into your minds. It's a notion. So for our reflection, for just a few minutes, I want you to close your eyes. I encourage you to, provided it feels comfortable for you. And turn an inward gaze and see if you can clear away a little bit of space in your mind and in your heart. Maybe take a couple of deep breaths. Just clear away what happened earlier today. Clear away what's going to happen later on and just be here. And then allow some thought, some imagery to come forward based on these two notions. The first is actions and emotions are connected. Actions and emotions are connected. The second notion is an invitation. Consider a time in your life where your emotions dictated your actions. Now, be gentle here, friends. You don't have to entertain the most difficult memory. I've certainly had anger arise, and I've acted on that anger, and I'm humiliated by it. I'm embarrassed. I'm saddened. I can't believe that I allowed myself to be so dysregulated. And so those are tender memories to work with. And instead, think of something a little less heavy. And in fact, it could be an emotion and an action that involved great kindness and compassion and consideration. We don't always have to conjure up the negative ones. We can entertain the good ones too. They're very valuable, and they're part of this building process. We have a tendency, however, to bring forward the negative. That is the realm of recovery. So I just want to create a space where there's just a little bit of quiet so you can allow that to come forward. And I encourage you, as you're in a reflection here, notice the details, notice the feelings, notice the feeling tone. There's an energy there. If you're angry, that's one feeling, but there's also a tone to that anger. There's an essence. And maybe that anger in your memory was hot or prickly, scratchy, edgy, sharp. Allow some of that language to come forward, because these are going to be defining the stones that you will pick up and use to build your balaklohe. Likewise, consider your action dictated by that emotion. In my own anger, prickliness, edginess, sharpness, curt. My face, I call it, I'm not even going to tell you that. Sorry. My face makes a puckering look that's really ugly. Judgmental. Nasty. My actions have a tone of indignation, righteousness. I don't have a tendency to be physically violent. That's not in my nature. But I'm a writer, and I can create weapons in my words, and they cut and slice and skewer. And it's ugly and regrettable. Take some time to see some of your emotions, to see some of your actions, see the bothness that lives in your space. Pick up your anger, pick up your kindness, pick up the actions related to them, and slowly start building your wall. All of this together frames the authenticity and wholeness of your life. And see if you can bring forward a spirit of reverence, a spirit of bodhicitta, that soft, wounded heart that says, man, I regret that. That was shitty. And I did that. It's going in my wall. I'm not going to bury it. I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to use it and put it in my balaclava. And I'm going to let that stone be sistered by my capacity to be affectionate and joyful and generous. Let's take a few minutes together in some glorious silence to create this space, your framed, boundaried balaclava space with the stones of your emotions and actions. I encourage you to stop building when you get thigh high. And if you see that you have more stones to gather, pause and maybe just build a little cairn, a little pile. But you want to keep your balaclava relatively low. You don't want to build a wall that you can't see over, nor can you be seen. You want to be spacious for this exercise. Okay. Breathe. Look around. Build. friends. The focus for the next week on creating and noticing stones of our own emotions and actions is going to be challenged by the emotions and actions of others. We have a propensity to keep our attention and our focus on how other people are interacting with us, how they are disrespecting my boundaries. And the reality is that is simply going to happen. People are going to disrespect my boundaries. And part of that disrespect is my own doing. Part of it. So my part in building a healthy boundary is to be crystal clear about what my boundary is. So when someone is going to toss something over that's disrespectful, I can pick that up and run with it. And by doing so, I've disregarded my own boundary. Whereas if somebody throws over into my space their disrespect, I can pick it up and I can put it on the wall and say, this isn't mine. And then go back to tending my wall. And what I'll do by tending my wall is I can figure out from that interaction what made me so upset. Why was that thing that was just tossed over into my space? Why am I stirred up by it? What are my feelings? Why does disrespect register for me? What are the conditions of that? The other person is going to do what they're going to do, and that's their work. My work is to pay attention to myself and all of the stuff that's being stirred up in my own emotional cauldron. And I can't do that with ease and peace if I don't first create a space for myself, a space of refuge, a space that has beauty and interest and creativity. It becomes my sacred space. And I decide what gets in and what doesn't. And even those things that I can't control, I can still control myself because I'm in a sanctuary I have created. That is the spirit of a boundary. The last thing I want to encourage is this weekend, when you're out and about, notice stone walls. They're everywhere. And one of the contemporary methods of building walls now is to make everything symmetrical. And although symmetry is very pleasing to the eye, I really like things neat and tidy sometimes. What I've noticed in these very symmetrical walls is how my gaze is incredibly superficial. I just glance right over them and my thought is pretty wall, symmetrical. There's no story there. There's hardly any emotion there. They're pretty sterile, even though they're nice looking. So go to masoned walls, stones that are different shapes and sizes, walls that are crumbling in places. Get out of your car and touch these walls. Feel the stones. Notice little plants and mosses growing out of them. There are places in the world where people leave rolled up messages, tokens, charms. These walls are infinitely more interesting to me. These boundaries and borders, these altars of understanding, these ways of connecting to people while also maintaining neutrality and separation. Boundaries, the Balaklohe, is a space of cultivating wisdom, care, and understanding for ourselves and by extension for everyone in our lives. Okay, friends, let's take a deep breath and we'll come back here. Let's come back and let's turn an inward gaze. So if you can close your eyes and just bring your gaze inward. And for a moment, if you can just imagine being gazed upon. You have an internal gaze, gazing at yourself, but there's something gazing at you, gazing. And there's something gazing at the gazer, looking at the gazing, and so on and so on. And what if you can entertain that all of that gazing from the infinite cosmos, the infinite, timeless, limitless beginning, all the way down, gazing, 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 has a delighted spirit, exactly as you are. This divine gazing since beginningless time is enjoying you. What if from the crown chakra you could let that enter and descend? I am sheltered by a gaze that delights in me. Let me repeat that. I am sheltered by a gaze that delights in me. And by the way, this gaze is unconditional. And that means the person that we disregard the most is also sheltered under this gaze. Ick. That's hard. Yuck. How can that be? Gross. And nevertheless, it is true. And so I get to look at my judgment there, because this infinite gaze, always delighting, is there. The practice is to see it. The practice is to feel it. The practice is to receive it. Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon, friends. Thank you so much for your practice here today. We'll see you next time, maybe even on Sunday. Namaste.